Bananas are everywhere. They're cheap, familiar, and constantly recommended for potassium. But for most of history, people relied on other plants that delivered even more and grew with far less effort. So why did these foods disappear from our fields and plates? This is not a nutrition myth, it's a quiet investigation. Stay until the end. One of these plants outperforms bananas and still grows where modern crops fail. Potassium is not a trendy nutrient, but it is a critical one. It regulates muscle function, nerve signals, hydration, and heart rhythm. Modern diets often point to bananas as the default source, not because they are exceptional, but because they are convenient. That convenience hides a larger story. For centuries, people obtained potassium from a much wider range of plants, many of which delivered more and asked for less. Before supermarkets standardized diets, potassium came from everyday foods grown close to home. Leaves, roots, beans, and seeds provided steady intake without supplementation. These foods were not labeled as superfoods. They were simply food. Their value came from reliability, not marketing. When agriculture shifted toward a narrow set of globally traded crops, many potassium-rich plants lost relevance, not because they lacked nutrition, but because they didn't fit new systems. Bananas became dominant for reasons unrelated to nutrition. They ship well, ripen predictably, and fit perfectly into industrial supply chains. That made them visible and familiar. But nutritional dominance does not equal nutritional superiority. Several traditional food plants consistently deliver more potassium per serving than bananas. The reason most people don't know this is not scientific uncertainty, it is historical selection. The 5 plants in this video share 2 traits. They are naturally rich in potassium, and they grow under conditions that frustrate modern agriculture. They tolerate poor soil, irregular watering, and uneven harvests. Those traits once made them essential household foods. Later, those same traits made them inconvenient. Potassium density alone did not save them. Compatibility with industrial systems mattered more. The first plant is Swiss chard. Long before spinach became the default leafy green, chard filled that role. It delivers significantly more potassium per serving than bananas, along with magnesium and other minerals. It grows continuously. You harvest leaves, and it grows back. For home gardens, this is ideal. For industrial farming, continuous harvest complicates scheduling and mechanization. Chard does not demand perfect soil or climate. It tolerates heat, cold, and neglect better than many modern greens. That tolerance once made it a staple. Over time, agriculture favored greens bred for uniform harvest and shelf life. Spinach replaced chard not because it fed people better, but because it fit distribution models better. Potassium content was irrelevant to that decision. The second plant is Jerusalem artichoke. This tuber stores large amounts of potassium underground, where it is protected from weather extremes. Once planted, it returns year after year with minimal care. It grows where potatoes struggle and continues producing even when neglected. Nutritionally, it rivals or exceeds bananas for potassium. Logistically, it resists standardization, storage, and long-distance shipping. Jerusalem artichoke feeds people locally and continuously, which once made it valuable. In modern systems, that same trait became a liability. Tubers vary in size and shape. Harvest timing is flexible, not synchronized. For families, flexibility reduces risk. For supply chains, it complicates forecasting. Potassium density does not compensate for logistical inconvenience in industrial agriculture. The third plant is fava bean, also known as broad bean. Beyond its protein content, fava beans provide substantial potassium. They grow in cool conditions and enrich soil through nitrogen fixation. Historically, they were a dependable mineral source during seasons when fruit was unavailable. Their gradual maturation spreads harvest over time, which benefits households but conflicts with mechanized harvesting. As farming scaled up, crops that ripened all at once replaced those that ripened gradually. Uniformity simplified machines and contracts. Fava beans lost ground to crops optimized for bulk processing, even if those crops delivered fewer minerals per serving. Potassium intake declined not because people rejected it, but because the foods that provided it quietly disappeared from everyday diets. The fourth plant is amaranth. While often remembered for its protein, its potassium content is frequently overlooked. Both the leaves and seeds provide meaningful mineral density. Amaranth grows quickly, tolerates heat and drought, and thrives in poor soil. Historically, it supplied minerals when fruit crops failed. Its flexible growth pattern helped households. That same flexibility later clashed with systems demanding rigid planting and harvesting schedules. Amaranth does not behave like a factory crop. It grows unevenly, reseeds itself, and refuses strict rows. From a nutritional perspective, this resilience is an advantage. From an industrial perspective, it is a problem. Mechanized farming depends on predictability, not abundance. Potassium-rich foods that resist uniform control rarely survive large-scale standardization, regardless of their nutritional value. The fifth plant is lupin. Known primarily for protein, lupin is also a significant source of potassium and other minerals. It grows in soils considered unsuitable for most crops and improves fertility through nitrogen fixation. Lupin fed populations with limited access to fruit for generations. Its need for basic preparation did not prevent widespread use. What ended its role was not nutrition, but incompatibility with industrial processing. Lupin varieties differ widely in taste, size, and behavior. That diversity once protected food systems. Industrial agriculture replaced diversity with uniformity. Crops that varied too much were excluded. Potassium content never entered the equation. The ability to standardize, process, and patent mattered more than mineral density or resilience. These 5 plants consistently deliver more potassium per serving than bananas in common preparations. Yet bananas dominate nutritional advice. This dominance is not scientific favoritism. It is logistical convenience. Bananas ship well, ripen on command, and fit centralized supply chains. Potassium followed distribution, not biology. The foods people were told to eat reflected what systems could deliver, not what nourished best. Over time, dietary guidance narrowed. One fruit became the symbol of one nutrient. Complexity disappeared. Potassium became synonymous with bananas, even as other foods quietly delivered more. The disappearance of these plants removed redundancy from diets. When a single food becomes the default source, resilience declines. Nutritional security benefits from diversity, not dependence. This shift also changed where minerals came from. Instead of soil-based diversity, diets leaned on imported fruit and supplements. Plants that once drew potassium from deep soil layers were replaced by foods grown for speed and appearance. Mineral density became secondary. Visual uniformity and shelf life took priority, reshaping both fields and plates. It is important to clarify. Bananas are not harmful. They are simply overrepresented. The issue is exclusion. When one food replaces many, diets lose flexibility. These 5 plants offered potassium through different seasons, climates, and conditions. They spread risk. Removing them concentrated nutritional dependence into a narrow pipeline vulnerable to disruption. In home gardens and small farms, these plants still quietly outperform expectations. They grow when fruit struggles. They deliver minerals when yields are inconsistent. Gardeners rediscover them not through trend, but through results. Potassium intake becomes a byproduct of eating resilient food, not a nutritional goal requiring planning. The question is not whether bananas should be replaced, but why alternatives disappeared. Potassium-rich plants once provided redundancy and stability. Their removal simplified supply chains, but weakened dietary resilience. What was gained in convenience was lost in diversity. Understanding that trade-off explains why nutritional myths persist long after better options fade from memory. What makes these plants relevant today is not a health trend, but everyday reality. Many people struggle to grow food consistently. Weather shifts, soil varies, time is limited. These plants reduce failure. They do not demand perfect timing or constant correction. Potassium becomes available through reliability, not optimization. In ordinary conditions, dependable food often matters more than peak nutritional charts. Small gardens reveal truths large farms can hide. When one crop fails, there is no backup field. These potassium-rich plants evolved in systems where failure had consequences. They spread harvest across weeks or months, reducing risk. Bananas provide potassium through global logistics. These plants provided it locally. That difference shaped their survival long before modern nutrition advice existed. Another overlooked factor is seasonality. Bananas rely on continuous imports. These plants deliver potassium during different times of year. Leaves, tubers, beans, and seeds mature at different moments. That staggered availability once stabilized diets. Modern systems collapsed that complexity into year-round sameness. Nutrition became predictable, but less resilient. Taste also played a role in their survival. These plants were eaten repeatedly because people enjoyed them. Flavor encouraged continued cultivation. When food production moved away from households, taste lost influence. Appearance, shelf life, and transport durability replaced it. Potassium density mattered little if a food did not travel well or fit packaging standards. Calling these plants forgotten oversimplifies what happened. They were not rejected by eaters. They were sidelined by incentives. Research, subsidies, and education focused on crops that scaled easily. Without reinforcement, cultivation declined. Knowledge faded. Over time, absence created the illusion that bananas were the primary option, not one option among many. Reintroducing these foods does not require rejecting modern agriculture. It requires broadening priorities. Home gardens, community plots, and diversified farms already integrate them successfully. Potassium intake improves naturally when diets rely less on single imported foods and more on varied local production. Diversity restores nutritional redundancy without complexity. These plants also change how people think about nutrition. Instead of chasing nutrients individually, they eat whole foods that deliver multiple benefits. Potassium arrives alongside fiber, minerals, and calories. Food becomes nourishment again, not a checklist. That approach defined diets long before nutrition labels existed. Climate variability makes this shift more relevant. Fruit supply chains are sensitive to disruption. Plants that grow across wider conditions reduce dependence on distant systems. These 5 plants tolerate heat, cold, poor soil, and irregular care. Potassium sourced from resilient plants is less vulnerable than potassium sourced from a single global crop. None of these plants alone replaces bananas. Together, they replace dependence. They distribute potassium intake across species, seasons, and soils. That distribution once protected diets from failure. Losing it simplified food systems, but increased fragility. Recovery does not require nostalgia, only attention to what worked. Bananas became symbolic of potassium because systems favored them, not because nature did. These 5 plants quietly delivered equal or greater amounts for generations. Their disappearance reshaped diets without discussion. Understanding that process reveals how nutrition narratives form. What we are told to eat often reflects what systems can deliver, not what nourishes best. Modern diets often reduce nutrition to single symbols. 1 fruit for potassium, 1 vegetable for iron. This simplification makes guidance easy to remember, but it removes context. These 5 plants remind us that nutrients were once distributed across many foods. Potassium was not a specialty. It was a background feature of everyday meals built around resilient local plants rather than global supply chains. When nutrition becomes centralized, vulnerability increases. If one food dominates a nutrient category, disruptions matter more. Weather, disease, transport delays, or market shifts affect access. These plants reduce that risk by spreading potassium intake across climates and seasons. Diversity functioned as insurance. Losing it did not break diets immediately, but it quietly reduced their margin for error. Growing these plants today is not complicated. Seeds exist. Techniques are simple. What is missing is habit. Once diets narrowed, knowledge followed. Relearning does not require expertise, only repetition. These plants reward attention with consistency. They do not demand precision. That makes them accessible to ordinary people, not specialists. Another advantage is yield stability. These plants may not produce record harvests under ideal conditions, but they produce something almost always. That reliability ensures potassium intake even in poor seasons. Bananas depend on uninterrupted logistics. These plants depend on soil and time. One model centralizes risk, the other distributes it. Modern agriculture excels at volume, not redundancy. It assumes systems will function as planned. These plants assume the opposite. They expect irregular care, uneven weather, and limited tools. Their design reflects human reality. That design once supported mineral intake without planning or supplementation. Removing it made nutrition more fragile, even as food appeared more abundant. Reintroducing potassium-rich plants into diets does not mean rejecting bananas. It means restoring balance. No single food should carry the burden of one nutrient. These plants complement rather than compete. They fill gaps bananas cannot, especially where fruit access is limited or unreliable. Nutrition improves when sources multiply. What we eat reflects systems more than science. Bananas became symbolic because they fit industrial delivery. These plants disappeared because they did not. That distinction explains why nutritional advice often lags behind nutritional reality. What nourishes best is not always what travels best. Understanding that difference changes how food choices are evaluated. The story of potassium is not about bananas versus plants. It is about simplification versus resilience. These 5 plants complicate the narrative by showing that better options existed and still exist. They challenge the idea that progress always improves nutrition. Sometimes it only narrows it. These 5 plants beat bananas for potassium, not because bananas are weak, but because diets were once broader. Modern farming did not remove them for nutritional reasons. It replaced them for logistical ones. Remembering them is not about rejecting modern food. It is about restoring options that quietly disappeared, and with them, a more resilient way of eating.